Hi everyone. So I'm Pierre. I've been a Rust station for 4 years or so, and it's been my job for a year and a half. Um, I've joined Twitter recently, and one of the recurring topics of conversation is inclusiveness in tech. Basically, how do we make it so people from a diverse background can be introduced to tech? Uh, and this is in an area where I feel Rust does particularly well with a real awareness from the ground up, starting with the code of conduct and then in the way everyone interacts with each other. But there is still a gap, I think, in making people comfortable to get started. So the idea with this talk is to try to convey that doing your first Rust project is not as scary as it may seem if you don't really know where to start. Quick show of hands, who here has never written a crate or published a crate to crates.io? Great, good audience. Okay, so Rust in the website describes itself as a language empowering everyone to build reliable and efficient software. Everyone means you, so here is how. I'll give you a simple recipe, you just have to follow the steps. And I'll give you the slides at the end, you can just check them out. So first step, you're gonna have to set up a few tools, including the compiler itself. And this step can already be pretty daunting in some languages, like C, C++, let's not throw names. But I've got a few recommendations for Rust that all fit on a slide. And that's not just the bare minimum, but enough to make you kind of comfortable hacking away. So first thing, most of the work is done by Rustup, which is the Rust toolchain manager. It will allow you to, for instance, switch from stable to nightly or install some components. But really, if you're starting, the only thing you need is install Rustup with this script and use the default settings. It's going to give you a toolchain with the Rust compiler, the standard library, the documentation tool, the build system, and you're already, like you've got a minimal setup, you're ready to write some code. But a few extras I'd suggest. A few components that Rustup will help you install. One is Rust format, the formatter. So if you consistently format your code with Rust format, you're going to have code that's in the same style as everyone in the community. So that means when you start reading other people's code from their GitHub repo, etc., you'll feel at home. And when they will read your code, they'll just feel good as well because like they're not, I don't know, being triggered by two spaces or something. Other tool, Clippy. It's a linter. Basically, it's your best and most patient teacher of idiomatic ways to write Rust. So if you've already got your code to compile, it will tell you, this is fine, but you can make it more idiomatic this way. And it will tell you very precisely why and why it's a better way to do it. So great way to learn tricks. And the Rust language server, that kind of depends on your setup, but basically make any text editor a powerful IDE. A little disclaimer on big projects, it's still getting there, but probably for just getting started, you'll be fine. Okay, I'm not gonna tell you how to set up your IDE or text editor because I don't want to get into flame wars. If you don't know at all, pick VS Code, it's fine. If you know what you want, just configure it, probably format on save, Rust language server, and that should get you going. And finally, a couple of crates that I use all the time and I strongly recommend from crates.io. Cargo Watch simply compiles your code when you save. So you can just have constant feedback from the compiler. And Cargo Edit, so you can add dependencies and in general, manage your dependencies without having to manually muck with your cargo.toml. So now you're ready to Rust, you'll want to find an IDE for your first crate. And that part can be a bit intimidating. But really what you want is to find something that you will enjoy using. If you struggle with this bit, it's completely okay. It's normal. Everyone struggles with it. But the good thing is you're not rushed. Whenever you have a good idea, like be aware and think of it as a potential idea. Don't pressure yourself because you're not finding an idea. Couple of sources of inspirations that work for me. One is workflow pains. So if there is something you do a lot on your computer and it's frustrating for some reason, you may want to think of writing a tool to make it less frustrating. And also you can look at existing tools. Sometimes you see something and you're like, wow, they solved this problem very neatly. But then I know a different context where this problem is not really solved. And then you can just piggyback on their work and get like all the benefits for none of the work. So an example of a crate I really love to use, and that came from an itch scratching background, Burnt Sushi's rib grep. Basically, it's grep but fast. So the itch is grep is slow, and how it's solved is we use the ignore crate from rib grep itself to do less work by not grepping on some files that you're probably not looking for, like your .git or these kind of things. And then it leverages the regex implementation from Rust itself, which is blazingly fast. And so together that gives you a great grepping experience. And you know it's a good idea because it can be explained in one sentence, like grep but faster. Now, everyone isn't Burnt Sushi. Everyone isn't gonna write code that's amazing for millions of programmers. So to make it less intimidating, let's take a case study of a crate I wrote that I'm probably the sole user of, proudly. And my itch is I like Unicode characters. And for instance, I want to find a light bulb to put on this slide to express the idea of having an idea. I don't want to be opening my web browser, going to some website, looking for a light bulb, copy, pasting. It's just too many clicks. So what I want is a simple FZF-like thing that I can do from the command line, and in a fraction of a second, I can get my Unicode character. If you're not familiar with FZF, it's a command line tool to find something, let's say a file in your file system typically, but it's a bit more general than that. And it's just an excellent interface. You just type a few characters and it uses a fuzzy matching algorithm to give you all the strings that kind of look like what you're typing. So it's a great way to quickly find something. So you found your itch, you know what you want to build. The next step is to leverage Newton's famous quote. If I have seen further, it's by standing on the shoulders of giants. This definitely applies in open source and maybe even more in the Rust community. So whichever your IDE is, it's likely that some crate is ready to do the heavy lifting for you. If it's not the case, you have two options. Either you write that crate that does the heavy lifting, but maybe because it's your first project, that's a bit intimidating, in which case I'd recommend to find another IDE where you'll find a crate that does the heavy lifting for you. Most problems, most interesting problems to solve have some solution somewhere. And by reusing a crate, you get bidirectional goodness. Like you're enjoying a quality implementation that's been tested by many people, and you get to adapt it to your use case, see what can be improved, and maybe feedback by raising issues, speaking to the maintainer, maybe even raising a PR. And so that way, that makes the ecosystem even better and richer. A great example of a crate that reuses work is SharkDP's FD, which is basically a faster find. And from the README itself, it says all the credit for the speedups come from the IDs behind ribgrep of the ignore crate and the regex crate. And so basically it's like, hey, you can accelerate grep this way, which is neat. Let's do the same for find. And that way you don't have to do a lot of work and you get all the benefit. And it's another tool that's like very lovely to use. So let's go back to the little Find Unicode toy project. How can I piggyback on other people's work? Well, part of the problem is just the data, and that's really an easy problem. You can go to the Unicode website and get a plain text file with the code point for each character and the description with some other fields. So all you need to do is take that file, pass it, and output some cleaned up version of the thing. So for instance, I generated this file which contains the character, the tabulation, and the description. And that's my input data. So let's assume I've got this already. Now the intimidating bit is the FZF-like interface, because you've got some fancy algorithms going on with fuzzy matching and stuff. And that's where I'm very happy to reuse someone's code. Now, FZF is written in Go, and there is nothing wrong with that. But like any popular Go project, there is a Rust clone, Scheme. And Scheme gives you a command line interface that does the same thing FZF does, which is called SK. And it also gives you a crate that you can use. So basically what I could do is simply depend on Scheme, use their library, and get my, like, I have no business logic to write, just get the tool I want. Now, let's assume you've got your own ID and you know what's gonna help you code it, like what giant you're gonna leverage. Let's get our tools out and get building. So this is kind of a typical workflow of how you'll go about building your crate. So first thing first, create a crate, cargo new, crate name. That's gonna create a directory, crate name. And in there, you're gonna have a hello world, a cargo configuration, and a Git repo ready to go. So now is a good time to commit your first commit, and you can already run your code and you're like not spending time boilerplating. Now, second thing I would typically do is open a window somewhere on the side and run cargo watch, and that's always gonna be running, and I'm gonna get instant compiler feedback as I go. Now you can pull in your dependencies. So in the example of Find Unicode, I decided to depend on Scheme, cargo add Scheme, and I'm ready to interact with that API. But of course, I don't know Scheme, like the API, before I've started looking at it. So use cargo doc to generate the documentation for your crate and all its dependencies. So it's nice that we added Scheme as a dependency. And with the open flag, you directly get it open in your browser. The great thing with this is if you have run cargo doc before, so you're not like pulling stuff from the internet, then you can just do it on the train. You don't need to be Googling for stuff and requiring an internet access. You just got all the documentation for everything you care about while you're building this crate. So this is kind of initial setup. And then as you go, don't forget to format your code, clippy it, and of course, cargo run to get feedback on, like, does it behave like I think it should? For cargo format and cargo clippy, depending on how fancy you want to go, you may want to put them into Git hooks or into your editor workflow, so you don't have to always type it manually. But yeah, roughly that's the idea. And now you're ready to write some code. I told you writing Find Unicode depending on Scheme was pretty easy. In fact, this is the entirety of the core logic of the application fitting on not even a full slide. So if you read from main down, get the data from the file. So, okay, I've prepared the data. That was like a few tens of lines, sorry. Create default options for Scheme. I didn't know it was a Scheme options builder, blah, blah, blah. I saw that by checking the documentation out. Then call the main Scheme function, which is run with, which takes these options, here are the default and the data I'm interested in. And then for each output, which is like anything that you select, just print it to the command line. It's that simple. No, this is kind of the contrived version. The version, if you check my GitHub, has like maybe a few tens more lines to handle some user input where if you want to change some things. But like this is the core logic. You can run this code and it does what I wanted to do. So once you've got, you're at that point where you've got your working product, there are kind of two branches. Either it solved your problem and you're happy, and that's great. Like you've written some Rust, you've had fun, you've solved your itch. But maybe at this stage, you're kind of enthusiastic, you want to share your thing with the world. And in that case, I'll give you a few more tips for polishing up and preparing the crate for release. So you noticed I recommended that for the core logic of your app, you find a crate to do the heavy lifting. Well, in fact, for everything else, I also recommend finding a crate to do it for you, because that's how you build quality production code without having to manually invent everything. So for instance, you want to take some command line arguments from the command line, use struct-opt. You may prefer clap, but struct-opt is nicer. And like that will give you everything you need. Even if I write a crate and I don't take command line arguments, I still use struct-opt because I get -- version and -- help, and I don't have to do anything. I get them for free. If you're doing anything with getting input or output data in some serialized format, use Serde. It's amazing. And also, if you want advice on how to do a good API, look at Serde's documentation. It's just the most idiomatic, beautiful Rust code you'll ever see. And then some completely trivial things, like you want to use some config file and you don't want to write yourself, oh, on Windows it's going to be there, on Linux it's going to be there. Use those. Basically, these are just 3 examples, but whatever the small or big problem you're trying to solve, there is probably a crate doing it better than you would in any reasonable time, or like it's a better use of your time to just reuse them and then contribute things to them and enrich the ecosystem. Rust makes it very easy to write documentation, just 3 slashes on top of your public things like functions, structs. So it doesn't write the documentation for you, so please do it. People who use your code will thank you. You may want to add some metadata to the cargo.toml. I never really remember what you can put in there or like exactly the syntax, but just check out the cargo book, like Google cargo book metadata, and you'll see what you can put. It's like description, keywords, license. So that way people looking for stuff on crates.io will come up with your solution and won't have to reinvent the wheel themselves. A nice README is always cool because if people just Google something, they're likely to end up in your GitHub repo. And then if you have like a little explanation of what problem you're solving, how to use your crate, and maybe an image or two to make it pretty, it's gonna quickly let them decide if they want to use your solution or not. And before you know it, that's it. You're a full-blown Rust station with a crate on crates.io. You just have to cargo publish. I omitted cargo login, but if you run cargo publish, it will tell you. So it didn't fit in the slide. So that's it. I hope I succeeded in demonstrating that it's not that scary to become a crates author. And I'll take any question. By the way, link to the slides if you're interested.
Bonsoir. Hi, not so much a question, but more of a set of comments. One, I noticed you're not using Tentivai for your search. And 2, I wanted to point out that when you say you contribute to GitHub and crates, I found that in my experience working in closed source environments with NDAs up the wazoo, the biggest help you can provide is not contribute source, but either fork or create issues. And publishing issues on a crate GitHub repo, I found is an incredible source of help because you give a lot of feedback. And even if you can't actually fix a bug, just saying, hey, there's a bug, guys, help me out. That's like you're actually helping the author come back, have a look at the source code and work more. So maybe you can expand a bit on how easy it is to integrate with the GitHub issues?
Yeah, 100% issues are a great way to contribute, like basically give feedback to the author. I don't know about any integration between Crazy.io or GitHub issues, but like when you go to Crazy.io, you've got a link to the GitHub. So the GitHub project, so you can just go there and raise an issue on GitHub. Maybe I didn't get part of your question.
It's not much of a question, more of an observation.
Anyone else?
Hey, Pierre, at the beginning, you mentioned two ways of getting tools. So there was Rust up add component and then cargo add or something like that. And I've run into this in the past, but I didn't quite understand why there are two ways, and it doesn't like how to make sense of that.
Basically, Rust up deals with stuff that's maintained by the Rust project, like Rust format. Well, like Rust C, the compiler, but that one is always there by default, and like less essential ones like Rust format. When you do cargo install, you're just getting some binary crate from crates.io. So that's much more like anyone can contribute these things. So if something is maintained by Rust, by the Rust project, you Rust up component add it. That's it.
Thanks for your talk. I know this is kind of controversial and you didn't really want to broach the subject, but editors, it's quite it's really difficult to decide what to use as a new person in Rust. So even if it's subjective, can you offer your opinion?
I lied when I said I didn't want a flame war. I love this subject of conversation. Well, I'd say good editors, Sublime, it's fast. You can configure it easily, like first install the plugin manager, and then you can very easily install plugins, so you can get it to do anything pretty easily. VS Code, they're pioneering the Rust language server stuff, so they're a good place to be for Rust, even though possibly it's a bit slower. If you're into Vim, if you're into Emacs, what else? IntelliJ, people use IntelliJ. Okay, if you want my recommendation for a newbie, VS Code or Sublime. They're both simple to set up. Oh, sorry, I forgot Windows was a thing. If you're gonna use Notepad, use Sublime. It's just better. Opinion.
One more question? Anyone? Cool.
No, because it would be trivial to do a little Rust program that gets the character and outputs the code. And I'm sure there is one somewhere, so you can just do that and pipe. Like, so for me, it's a different problem. It's like Unix, like I want to find a character. That's it. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you very much, Pierre.